Welcome to Bots in the Building. My name is Michelle Davis and I'm your host. So, this podcast is going to focus on where AI integration meets team adoption. So, if you're saving for the first time, prior to my 10 years or so in digital marketing and building automations, and in the last several years, my business has focused on AI integration. And prior to that, I had a whole nother career. I spent a couple of decades working with governmental and nonprofit entities, and 16 years was spent as a manager. And over the course of those 16 years, I implemented so many changes in how we handle clients, changes in our processes, changes in just our mindset and our mind frame around doing new things to better serve the clients that we worked with. And I also had my share of technology changes as well, where, I had to lead my team through adopting a new software. So when we think about change management, I've had my share in implementing change with organizations. And it's not enough to decide to make a change if the very team that's supposed to use and implement whatever it is that you come up with, if they don't integrate it in their daily workday, it means nothing. So this podcast is dedicated to not just helping people install tools and systems, because that's the easy part. This podcast is dedicated to getting people to adopt the change. So with that said, let's get into the episode. AI and technology integration is not tools, it's systems. If you've been following this series I've been doing, what I've been talking about is, I've made a lot of observations. And in case you haven't seen those same observations, we're heading into a digital age, not just for business, but also in everything we do. I talked about the fact that, calling my dentist's office and, now quality assurance is being handled by AI. When you submit a resume for a job application, AI is screening those job applications or your resume. Things are changing and they're changing fast. And not a lot of business owners are ready for the change. And because the changes are happening so fast, businesses and companies are finding themselves scrambling to keep up with the times. They're integrating technology and they're integrating AI in a sort of haphazard way. And I've been talking about that in the series. And in case you missed the other episodes, you want to go back and watch those or listen to those, depending on what platform you're catching the podcast on. But one thing that companies and businesses fail to do before integrating technology is they don't assess their problem. Once you conduct the assessment, you have to identify what the fix is. And the mistake a lot of companies and business owners make is they want to integrate a tool. They see this tool, maybe they attended a conference, maybe they saw something on social media, an advertisement, and they're locked in to this tool. And it's not necessarily a tool when we think AI integration, even though that's the way a lot of companies and businesses think. It's really about what problem do you need to solve and what system is going to solve that problem for you. Because AI tools come and go, they evolve and they change. And if you're more focused on the tool or a specific way of doing things, you're going to miss the mark with the problem you're trying to fix, because it's not going to solve the problem. I'm not going to get too much into the assessment because I've already done an episode about that. But in this episode, it's about identifying the fix. What I'm noticing a lot of companies doing is they view the fix as two things. They hire someone, an employee, to kind of take over that responsibility of integrating AI. And that's their job, to figure out what they're trying to fix and what tools or systems are going to work best. The second thing I see happening is the company has their mind set on a particular tool. Maybe previously they tried to get this tool working and no one adopted the tool. That whole integration project fell apart. Now they're trying to revive the tool, even though Other tools have since come out and could probably achieve what they're trying to achieve better and more efficiently. And they're so locked into the system or the tool, or they just want to use Microsoft, or they just want to use Claude, or they just want to use ChatGPT. And they're so fixated on what they're going to use that they've lost sight of the problem they're trying to fix. Because AI integration, which is what this today's topic is all about, is it's not just that single tool. It's the system you want to integrate into your company that's going to fix the problem that you should have identified when you assess the whole situation. When you bring in an employee to kind of come in, not just do their day to day, but also figure out all of the stuff that should have been figured out before they got there, the assessment part and what the problem is and what they're trying to fix, and at least a basic foundation, they end up trying to navigate it all in addition to doing the day to day duties. Let's talk about what identifying the fix really is all about and exactly what to do to do that. Another thing I wanted to mention about like hiring and bringing someone in as an employee is I've seen companies go in two different directions with this. Either they hire someone with a whole lot of technical experience because they want that person to build whatever AI system or technology that they want to integrate into their business or company, and the person has no people skills. What tends to happen is they have this great system and they don't know how to connect the people to the system. And the people or your team is really what's going to make the system work. They could sabotage it, not intentionally, but they could choose not to use it and revert to old habits. Maybe they're not comfortable, or maybe they just don't understand why I can't continue doing things the way I've been doing it for the last 5 years, 10 years, or, depending on how old your company is, maybe even longer. If someone just comes in and they just have that tech knowledge, they don't know how to help people adopt the new way of thinking, because it's really about getting people to accept change. The other route that people take is they hire someone who only knows how to get people to adopt change, or training people to, around the change, but they don't know the technology. So they're not linking the technology to the actual tasks and duties of the employees. And so there's a gap. How do you find the balance? That's what companies are struggling with right now. It's hard to find a balance because there's a lot of people that, yeah, they've done change management before. I have 16 years experience leading change and training and helping employees evolve and adapt change. And I also have specialized training in technology, particularly around AI and automation. It's hard to find that mix. I'm not saying I'm this special unicorn, but it's really, really hard to find that mix because number one, a lot of companies have not integrated AI yet. So there's not a lot of training unless someone seeks that particular training out. And having training and being a practitioner are two different things, where you could get a certification or you could learn how to do something. But if you're not actively doing it and you only have kind of coursework experience, not really able to help people connect that technology to real workforce tasks. And so that's the issue too when you're trying to find that perfect hire. And there's nothing wrong with hiring someone. When you talk about AI integration or technology integration, that's a very unique skill. And you may not have someone on the team that could actually do it. And you have those that are knowledgeable about AI, but they've never really built anything. And certifications and studying AI is not the same as actually using it and teaching others to, and training others to use and adopt technology. It's two different things. Knowledge alone, coursework alone, certification alone is not going to help the problem either. And here's the solution. A big part of that assessment phase that I spoke about in the last episode is identifying the problem, but also coming up with a plan for what integration looks like. And this is a plan that should already be mapped out, when your new employee arrives. And that is, yes, okay, we know what the problem is now. We've really mapped out all of our processes in our company. We know what we want to fix. What does that timeline look like? What does integration look like for us? What are realistic expectations in terms of how long that will take? What do the phases look like in your integration process? It's not like a light switch where you're going to bring in someone to train everybody on this AI tool. They're going to build the system and then you're going to flip a light switch and everybody's going to start using it. That's just not how it works. So you have to have a timeline for how long it's going to take and what's going to happen from the time you put together the plan to people actually adopting and using it and beyond. A big part of what Gemstone Consulting Services does is, we handle that assessment part for you and we help you put together the plan. When you talk about technology integration, it's not just managing, the actual use of technology or, installing the system, whatever that ends up being, or the tool. It's about attitude changes and behavior changes and people's comfort level in managing fears and showing them how the technology can work for them and help them be more efficient in their jobs. And if you don't understand the technology, it's going to be a real gap in the employees feeling like this is something that's going to help them and taking the time to understand it enough so that they actually adopt the changes long term. When this is done properly and you have a plan, the goal is not to fix everything in your company. You can't do that and expect people to adopt it. You figure out what's having the most impact in your company, and that is what you fix first. So maybe you're having slow reporting. Maybe, employees aren't efficient in their email or whatever the fix is that you think technology is going to help them with. And you look at what's having the biggest impact. And you can't have employees trying to manage and handle, or even a new person that you're bringing in is, manage and handle 20 different issues your company may be having. With your plan that you created during your assessment phase, you should be identifying what's having the biggest impact in your company right now. And let's work on that and fix that. And then once you successfully integrate that change, then it's on to the second most thing that's impacting your operations or your company or the efficiency of your employees, and you integrate things in phases from there. And what I'm seeing is a lot of companies are looking to get everybody on ChatGPT or they're looking to get everybody on Claude, but what does that mean exactly? What are people getting on Claude to do, or what are people getting on Copilot to do or ChatGPT to do? And all of those are phenomenal tools, and all of those tools may be a part of your plan. But if your plan isn't mapped out, none of that means anything. And you have to really think thoughtfully before you ever think of a tool or a particular software. What is the problem you're trying to solve? And that's going to make it so much easier on a company's leadership, or if you're a small business, maybe it's just a business owner. Change comes in increments, and you have to make it bite size, and you have to start with what makes the most impact for your company. What's going to change the trajectory for your company? What's having the biggest impact? Where is the bottleneck the worst in your company? What's actually sucking the life out of your company? And you start there. As you successfully integrate technology to solve that problem, then you move on, to what's the second most, third most. And this gives your new hire clarity on what it is they have to do. They're given a blueprint, like this is what we're working on. Forget the tool. Forget the tool and focus more on this is the problem we need to solve. We need to figure out what system can we put together, which may be multiple tools. There's so much integration right now with AI, and you need to think what integrations, what systems are you putting together? And it may be 3, 4 different tools. Don't lock in before you know what the problem is you're trying to solve. So if you have recently made a technology hire, or are about to, the most useful thing you can do right now is get honest about what you're asking them to actually do and what the timeline is for what you want them to achieve. This requires you to look at not what the job description says, because the job description is what it is. You wrote a bunch of duties and things that you want the person to do, but you have to really be realistic. What are they walking into? What systems do you have in place? What is the infrastructure for them to be successful in actually achieving results for your company? When I say what is actually there, it's the teams, it's the existing systems, it's the infrastructure, it's the foundation, it's the culture of the company, it's the history of the previous changes and integration attempts. What went wrong when you may have attempted to integrate change in the past? Those are important things to know. The other piece is what went right about those changes. What did people, was it something about the change that went well? The history of change and how your team adapts to change, those things are really, really important. And because you want to replicate whatever it is you did for those changes to be successful, and you don't want to replicate what you may have done for those changes to not take effect or to take hold. And that is the best clarity you can give a new hire is, what they're walking into, and have a realistic timeline for what you want them to achieve. So with that said, if you're responsible for technology decisions in your company and want a clear picture of where to start, I offer a free 20-minute complimentary integration readiness conversation. We talk about where you are as a company and where you're trying to go and what you're trying to achieve. And you will leave with a clear picture of where your company stands right now, as well as a recommendation for next steps. Just because you may not have done things perfectly in the past doesn't mean you can't get back on track. And just because you may have skipped the assessment phase and you went straight to integration because you saw a tool and you liked it and you thought it would be cool to integrate into your company, it's not too late, because we can always backtrack, and it doesn't mean that the tool you selected won't do any good for your company. It just means, let's take a step back. Let's assess, even though you didn't do it, in the beginning, let's do it now. And let's reevaluate what it is that you're trying to achieve and map out a plan for you to get there. Obviously, 20 minutes is not a lot of time, but you'll leave with something to help give you some clarity and direction for your next steps to get you back on track. You can either use the link in the show notes or the description, depending on where you're watching or listening to this podcast. Or you can reach out to me at info@gemstoneconsultingservices.com and say, hey, can I set up a 20-minute integration readiness conversation? Thank you for tuning in. I hope you tune in for the next session where we talk about simplifying the implementation process. And with that said, see you next time.